Welcome to your National Gallery of Art. And welcome to the Sharon Percy Rockefeller panel presentation, co-organized by the National Gallery of Art and FAPE, the Foundation for Art and Preservation in Embassies. I'm Eric Motley, the Deputy Director of the National Gallery of Art, and take great pleasure in welcoming you. This annual program recognizes Sharon Rockefeller for her extraordinary commitment to the arts, and specifically to FAPE and to the National Gallery of Art. Sharon, we're very happy to have you with us. Our friend and arts patron, Aggie Gunn, is the underwriter of this program. For today's discussion, Ellsworth Kelly and Roy Lichtenstein, a Centennial celebration, the National Gallery is honored to host 4 individual panelists. Hayes Greenfield, musician and educator. Dorothy Lichtenstein, president of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation and FAPE board member. Artist Odile Odita. Yes. And Jack Shear, president of the Ellsworth Kelly Foundation and FAPE board member. The conversation is to be moderated by Harry Cooper, our National Gallery senior curator and head of modern and contemporary art. On behalf of the National Gallery of Art, I'd like to recognize our colleagues at FAPE and would like to thank them for their commitment in this partnership. Chairman Joe Carroll-Lauder, President Eden Rafshun, Vice President Darren Walker, and Director Jennifer Duncan. We're very pleased to have you with us today. And now it is my pleasure to recognize Harry Cooper.
Thank you, Eric. Is this working? Yes, okay, we probably have to hold it pretty close. Handheld mics today, okay? So, thank you. And I want to thank several people at FAPE, of course, Jen Duncan, Caitlin O'Connor, Eleanor Dennehy, at the National Gallery, Ali Peel, Chelsea Souza, Rachel Henderson, Noel Go, Kelly Studio, Mary Ann Lee, Jack Cowart, director of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. So we're here because on Friday, Roy Lichtenstein would have turned 100 years old, and because Ellsworth Kelly would have turned 100 years old last May 31st. And I had the idea that that was a good excuse to bring these people together and celebrate 2 incredible artists, not just because, you know, they were born in the same year, 100 years ago, but because they're so important to FAPE, they're so important to the National Gallery. We have almost 300 works by Kelly and over 400 works by, who's counting, by the other guy. And that is a result of many gifts from the artists themselves, from their spouses, their estates. 400? Yeah. You know, we're open. The gift doors are open anytime. But speaking of gifts, you know, gifts from many patrons, from the Gemini GEL Print Workshop, Sid and Joni Felsen. I don't think they could be here with us this year, though they're great FAPE supporters. Many other people. I know that Robert and Jane Meyerhoff collection will be giving us a huge trove of works by both those artists. And Bob Meyerhoff is here with us. Thank you, Bob. Raise your hand. Yeah. Bob and Jane like to collect artists their own age, and Bob is 1 year younger than Ellsworth and Roy. And so is Sid Felsen, for that matter. So lots of really impressive people of great vitality. I hope we all get there. And Joe Carroll Lauder, who has promised us a wonderful Ellsworth Kelly painting. Thank you, Joe Carroll, and her husband, Ronald. I do have slides. Okay. Just start taking a look at that one. So just briefly, you have the bios in that wonderful pamphlet that Faye put together. But Dorothy Lichtenstein, president of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation, Faye board member, was married to Roy Lichtenstein for almost 30 years, from 1968 until his passing in 1997. She's a trained art historian, an experienced gallerist in her earlier years, and now an important advisor and supporter of many arts and science organizations. Jack Shear on my right, president of the Ellsworth Kelly Foundation, Faye board member. You can see the symmetry is just overwhelming here, which is, I like symmetry. Married to Ellsworth Kelly, and again, who's counting, but for almost 30 years, from 1994 until Ellsworth's death in 2015. Jack is a photographer in his own right, and speaking of which, wonderful 2 photographs by Jack of Ellsworth and Roy. A major collector of works on paper.
Looks good, Big.
Big is good. Yeah, we have the monitor here. So, but if you want to crane your necks, you can look back. And the foundations that these 2 run have been incredibly active. Check out their websites, the catalog Resonés in Progress, and so on. So the plan today is to hear from sort of back and forth from Dorothy and Jack, and a little about the people they knew so well, and then to move on to our panelists on the margin there, Odelia and Hayes, who each had their relationships with the artists. So let me advance one more time. And we'll start back at age 3 or so. Ellsworth and Roy were born about 65 miles apart. Roy in Manhattan, Ellsworth up the Hudson in Newburgh. Very close, but worlds apart in a way. Very different backgrounds, different families. Ellsworth's, this is going to be kind of like the newlywed game, where I ask the spouses how much they know, I guess, But
Do we have to tell the truth?
Yeah. What do you know about Ellsworth's earliest years and where he came from?
Do you want to start? So I think this is really an odd exercise on a number of levels, because it's like trying to interpret someone's dream that they just told you in the morning after they got up from sleeping. So there's a large swath of Ellsworth's life. I don't know if you're going to get into this or not, but we met when I was 28. I moved up to Spencertown in 1984. So I've been there almost 40 years. The age difference was extreme. It was 30 years. Ellsworth was, when I moved up, I was 30 and Ellsworth was 60. I like to tell this little story about the 2 of us, which is we'd be on airlines, or a flight attendant would come up to us and say, "Oh my God, you take such good care of your dad." And to me, I didn't see that in any negative way whatsoever, because what happened is they saw the love and the care that I was giving to Ellsworth. And to me, all of our friends knew our relationship. I had no problem. There was no hiding anything. But to the people out in the world, it was important that they saw the love and care. I think that's one of the stories I love to tell about our relationship. As far as, I see you have both of them with their mothers.
Yes, and thank you, Jen, Duncan, and Fabe for providing that.
But Ellsworth had a little bit of a tortured relationship with his, well, maybe tortured's not, no, tortured is the right word, sorry. He was the middle child. His brothers were named David and Alan, and when he was named Ellsworth, they could not say Ellsworth, so they called him Bub. So, I mean, that's, Ellsworth, Bub Kelly. Sounds like
Bub doesn't work for Ellsworth.
No,
really.
definitely
He's not
does
a Bub.
The thing that's amazing about Roy and Ellsworth were that they were really old school and gentlemen. Like that's whatever their mothers did, really the quality of who they were as people, not even as artists, but they were self-effacing, they were very quiet, they were gentlemen, they did the right things at the right time, and I appreciated our life together. So,
thank you, Jack. And I'll just fill in a little bit by saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellsworth's parents were both from Wheeling, West Virginia, whereas Roy's parents were German Jewish New Yorkers. Yes?
wait, here.
Okay, you need to pick that
Yes.
up. And
Is it
yeah,
on?
it's on, but we need to really talk.
Okay. Well, Roy's mother was Southern Belle, actually. She was very cultured. And when he was young, she took him they lived on the Upper West Side. They went to the Museum of Natural History, and he went to the museums really as a young boy. He had a younger sister who joked and said she thought your arm was always supposed to feel as if it was broken when he would give her an Indian burn when she got in his way, which I guess was frequent. But his family was close, and Roy's father died quite young. He was not 50 years old. And I think Roy, when the war was over, World War II, he was planning to move to Paris and paint there, as Ellsworth did. And his father was ill. He was furloughed home and to see his father. And he was then offered a job at Ohio State University as a teaching assistant. And he had been a student at Ohio State. He was, I guess, really trying to get away from New York and for a while. Then he spent all his time in Ohio trying to get back to New York desperately, which he eventually did.
I love this picture, which I would caption two styles of masculinity. Flexing and chilling, really, both wonderful. So here they are as young boys, and as Dorothy was saying, Roy had all Manhattan, at his doorstep, and saw Benny Goodman play at Carnegie Hall in 1938 concert. Went to museums, was interested in music and art from an early age. Whereas Ellsworth, he did get to New York, but it wasn't. Didn't see the Met until he was in high school, I believe. But the parallelism is quite amazing that they're both very interested in art, and Ellsworth also in theater, whereas Roy also in music. Mm-hmm. And I think both of those you could probably trace forward.
Well, I think people don't realize, I don't think this is entirely true, but Ellsworth didn't speak until he was 5. And I guess that means he didn't speak a lot, he would. But he had a stutter, a speech impediment that he was really concerned about. And he had an incredible teacher who said he should go into Manhattan and see a play on, and he saw Hamlet with two famous actors at the time. I think it took him out of himself. He became another person when he was acting, and he got up and did some kind of reading, and the teacher said, "Now this isn't the Mr. Kelly we know," because he did a great job. So.
And I never heard him stutter at all.
No, he actually a faith healer when he was in his 20s actually pulled the devil out of his mouth. And
Jack can be funny, but
What?
I actually know when he's being serious, and he's being serious.
No, I am being serious now. I mean, no, it was, and he asked this woman who was always perpetually sick. He said, "Why are you always sick if you're like a faith healer?" And she said, "Because I take on the illnesses of the people that I heal."
Wow. So here we have a couple pictures around.
But then he turned out to be an atheist, so.
An ingrate, apparently. Right on. Two pictures probably around high school graduation time, and Dorothy already was looking ahead to the war years, and the fact that both of them served. Both of them saw combat in Europe. Both of them were involved or found a way to be involved with art in their service during the war, which I don't know how much detail we want to get into, but let's see. Basically, Ellsworth was stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland, and visited the National Gallery. He then was part of the Ghost Army, so-called. He went to Europe 10 days after Normandy, and he was involved in the construction of these fake pieces of equipment to fool the enemy. Roy, for his part, was at Camp Forest in Tennessee. No, sorry, that's Ellsworth. Roy, help me out here. Mississippi, Camp Shelby. Yeah, okay. And he worked as a draftsman, map maker, and went to Europe a little in December, a few months after Ellsworth. Both sketching a lot. Do we have sketches of from both of them in Europe? I mean, not on the screen, but
I think.
Yeah.
I know we have some sketches that Roy did when he was young there.
We have complete notebooks of Ellsworth, and also a list of, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but a list of objects that he wanted to see when he was in Europe.
Yeah. And so Europe became especially important for Ellsworth. He went back to France on the GI Bill. Roy also benefited from the GI Bill to finish up at Ohio State. Correct?
Yes, and then work as a teaching assistant.
Yeah. So great stories just embedded in American history for both of them. Before we get to the relationship between them, which I want to talk about briefly, well, tell me how they met. Was it at Coenties Slip when they both lived there, this amazing little part of Lower Manhattan on the East River, which included artists like Robert Indiana, Agnes Martin, Jack Youngerman.
Leonora
20.
Leonora 20.
Oh, Lenore Tawney, yes, yep. I'm sure there's others as well. In fact, there's a new book called The Slip. That's about right. That history. So they were at the Slip together for a few years in the early 60s.
But what I know, and like my team has put together something exhaustive. It could be a book about the relation. We can do that later. But what I have is that you basically were introduced by Jack Youngerman in the '60s at some point. Roy was introduced.
That's right. I mean, I think Roy met Ellsworth earlier than that, but we met him in Southampton.
Right.
He was renting a studio in Bridgehampton and painting, and we met him through Jack Youngerman. They had both lived in Paris. Jack was a bit younger. I don't think.
Well, and also Coenty Slip.
Coenty Slip,
with,
yes.
With his wife.
So we spent a lot of time with him that summer, and with other friends who were there, Diane and Paul Waldman.
Actually, there's a piece that I have to give you the other half of, because evidently there's a Paul Waldman that you have one half of it and we have the other half of it.
Oh, well, let me give it to you because you have a
I
drawing.
would love to give it to you.
We'll arm wrestle.
No, okay, we'll arm wrestle.
And this kind of relationship that you're seeing here was also very much the relationship between Roy and Ellsworth. I think they're very, very friendly and playful. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, first of all, I mean, Roy really liked Ellsworth's work, and he had great respect for him as an artist. Ellsworth was. Well, I always want to say that Jack was one of the best things that ever happened to Ellsworth. Ellsworth was very quiet. He was kind of shy, friendly but shy. And it's just, he just became much more relaxed. I think that was really something lovely.
There's an
to
example.
see.
They're both in cowboy hats at Douglas Kramer's annual hoedown.
Yeah, except people have told me that Ellsworth never told any stories. He was very quiet. And then you came along and you couldn't shut him up. Like, he loved to tell stories.
No, I think that's true. He would always call Roy. People were always doing portfolios of friends to raise money for something or other. And Ellsworth would call Roy and say, "They said you were doing it. Are you really doing it?" So they would go back and forth.
That is an actual hook that they use a lot, where they say, we're talking to them. So
that's right.
That's a little problematic sometimes. But Ellsworth, one of the rare artists that Ellsworth ever traded with was Roy, because Ellsworth said, "I like my work better than anybody else's, so I don't want anybody else's work that I don't like." We actually had one of the glasses that's currently in the show up in New York that was curated by Irving Blum. And we gave it to the Museum of Modern Art in memory of Roy for their collection. And oh my God, look at that photo.
That's interesting about what you said about Ellsworth, because Bob Meyerhoff has told me that when Roy would visit the Meyerhoff place, he would go to the Roy Gallery because, quote, that was the only work he understood. But Roy was rather shy and quiet too, right?
He was reticent, except once he knew someone, then he would become more relaxed. I mean, he had a good, very bright sense of humor, but he was quiet. I used to joke. I say he thought anyone in a jacket and tie was an authority figure, and to my surprise, I actually always thought Bob Meyerhoff was just a little bit older than Roy, and now I find out.
Yeah, here they are again.
It's true.
On the screen.
Pléiade.
Yes, just wonderful pictures, including their Emmy Pulitzer, who I don't think is here, but is often here for these meetings. we could just make that a Christmas card, right, or something, yeah, or a Hanukkah card.
That's a great photo.
With Frank, Stella, and Bob Rauschenberg in between. And getting back to FAPE, here the Green Street mural, which of Roy's, which has ended up in the recreated for the Mexico City embassy.
We think, we hope.
We hope.
We
Oh,
think
still
it's
to
happening.
come. Still to come.
Still to
Okay. So it was really just to wind this up. I guess you could say in the '60s that they really hit their strides. And then in the '70s, they were both showing with Leo Castelli, although Roy was showing earlier with Leo, working with Gemini, and having these amazing parallel careers. And sadly, Roy's ended some 15 years before
soon.
Ellsworth.
Way too
soon. Yeah. So.
But I think Roy actually wanted Ellsworth in the Castelli, and that's why he left Janice, because of Roy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes,
So many-
Roy, and also I think Paul was
Wall.
putting pressure on him too.
I came in with
But-
all these notes, and I'm learning so much, so thank you. I hope someone's taking all this down.
Wait, I'll just leave this for
Leave
you.
that with me, yeah.
And I didn't bring any notes.
Okay.
So,
So
a wild card.
we'll move to part 2, and we'll circle back to you two. But we have Hayes Greenfield and Odelia Donald Odita, and they each knew the respective. They're on their respective sides, although I know that Odelia is very interested in Roy's work as well. So maybe I'll start with you, and if you could just tell us first of all about how you met Ellsworth and your relationship with him and what he has meant to your work, which is the work of a great. I don't know if you would call yourself a muralist, but certainly a painter on canvas, often at architectural scale, and with architectural commissions.
I mean, first of all, I'm happy to be on this panel. I felt like the first part of it, I should be sitting over there and just listening to these amazing stories you guys had to say. I'm also learning a lot here. With Ellsworth, I could say I just entered the work through college, being a university student, and essentially misunderstanding the work, not knowing the full breadth of the work or the scale of the project, of his working history. Over the years, though, I would see myself looking at it and basically slowly getting an understanding of it through just the way that my practice was growing. There was a sensibility there's a generosity in Ellsworth's work that makes you feel like you can enter it even if you fully don't understand it. The piece that you have out there I understand is going to be brought down at the end of the day today.
Yes, our Kelly panels, you might have noticed that there were some cranes nearby and they have to come down because of a skylight repair issue. But we delayed that until this session is over.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that piece it seems simple on one hand, just the 24 colors, but 18?
Yeah.
18 colors.
Who's counting?
Right.
Yeah.
But the 18 colors really, I think, speak to, like, that simplicity speaks to the complexity of his whole oeuvre, of everything he's done. I was driving here, I was looking at the shadows hitting the buildings and thinking about his project that he did in the 50s, drawings on a bus, where he traced the shadows, the light and shadow across his paper as he was on this bus writing. The fact that he took that then to his studio to make further drawings, ink drawings of the pencil drawings he did in the book, and then from there going on to make paintings out of that, which I think would be what he spent the next decades exploring in so many ways.
Sorry to interrupt, but you said you misunderstood his work at first. Was that because you were seeing it in reproduction, or what was the misunderstanding?
I think it's just, it could be academic education, just the way in which, people like figurative art more than they like abstract art in general. There's a sense of understanding, figures. That's a tree, that's a chair, that's a plant, versus what you have in abstract work. But really, both artists are fully entrenched in the notion of perception, of how you perceive. And this is what I love about the both of them. When I look at Ellsworth's colors and how complex they are, seeing the shadows outside and the velocity of change when you have hard shadows versus soft shadows, and how he explores that with all his different panel work in the paintings. And then I look at Roy's work and I think about the fact that he conceptualizes the color in the aspect of its foundational or primary elements of red, yellow, blue with black, white, being able to construct a universe of color and a universe of depiction with red, yellow, blue, black, white.
There we go on the screen, one of the great red, yellow, and blue.
But how our mind fills in the blank. We just are getting, let's say, and he did work with colors more than just red, yellow, blue, of course, but our mind fills in the blank. He's able to actualize how we perceive space through like the lens of like a cartoon or the mass-reproduced imagery of the commercial world. And let's say we can call that the simple thing in the world, the newspaper, cartoon, the comic book. But then he takes it to a whole nother level of exploration, of conceptual exploration, of social exploration, landscape, of objects of history. And that is, in a certain way, what Kelly is doing with other kinds of interests, other focus.
Yeah, I love this slide comparison. Speaking of perception,
Yeah.
two things that sculpture can do, two totally opposite things that sculpture can do perceptually, both in our sculpture garden.
Negating space in one aspect, that full volume, that physical element negates space. And then the other one is just like, it's a house, but we perceive, but what is that house made of? How is it constructed? How do we
space
fully understand
inside
it?
out, really.
Yeah.
So since we've been dealing with biography, tell us also, and not that this is the main thing, but a little bit about your own relationship with Ellsworth. You knew Ellsworth, not Roy.
Right. Let me start with Roy, because when I went to Ohio State University, and he was the big figure there. I mean, he was symbolic there, and his sculpture was at the airport, Birds in Flight. So, we had those kind of things. And Ohio is it's not New York City where the Ohio I grew up in, rather, is not like what it is today, where you have the Wexner Center and so forth. But we didn't really have a lot of art references or things to really guide us through that. But I had my father, who was an artist, who was a professor.
We're beating up on Ohio today. I'm sorry. I don't know. My dad was from Cleveland, and almost.
I was born in Dayton.
Okay, go Ohio.
My father was a professor at Ohio State University. He founded the History of African Art and Art program there. I ran around this the building there, Hoyt Sherman Building, Hoyt Sherman Hall.
Yes, right. Who was Roy's great teacher
Yes.
at Ohio State.
Had a very big influence on Roy.
Yes, and in fact, this house sculpture really comes out of, in many ways, of Hoyt Sherman's teaching about perception and memory and so on. Yeah.
So for me, like it was aspirational to go to a school, Ohio State, which was great resources, a really great school in the end of the day, and have this understanding that there was this great artist, Roy Lichtenstein, who was also here. He taught here. He was a student here. And you have the potential to go out in the world and do something possibly as great as this artist. And it was with Ellsworth. I was at a artist residency, Art OMI, in 1998, and a lot of really brilliant people were there with me at the time. Franklin Sermons and Cecily Brown and Jenny C. Jones and many other people. We one afternoon my wife and I, we took a ride into town, I believe, and we saw Ellsworth talking to a curator, and I got art geeky and was like, wow, that's Ellsworth Kelly. I want to go over and talk to him. I want to say hi. And I introduced myself. I told him I'm at Art OMI. I'm a fan of his work. And he introduced me to the curator of prints. I think it was a print show he was organizing in Boston at the time. And then a couple years later, in Chatham, because we would hang out in Chatham, I think it was a couple years later, but I'm not sure. I'm not that good at that kind of memory. But I saw both you and him in the restaurant. We had we ate next to each other. And we're talking, and and then I would always kind of bump into you guys here and there. And then once I became a part of FAPE, then it became more of a regular sort of thing. But
It's all about FAPE. Thank you, FAPE.
yeah. But my appreciation,
yeah.
I just want to finish and say my appreciation for Ellsworth has grown over the years because of just my own self-education on his work and the profundity of his dealing with the notion of monument, engaging a practice that I think both him and Roy were engaged with, one that is based on modernity, the idea of the modern, of bringing oneself into being the best of what you can be as an artist, the present tense, and taking that with a kind of optimism of what you can do into the way that you speak towards the future. And then looking at their work and relating it to like the ways in which you have artists working today, talking about mass reproduction, about artificial intelligence, Photoshop, everything of this sort of thing, like just all this technology, you can see this as just embedded in the earlier works and embedded in the project, the ambition of the projects of these two artists. So I feel like they're the moms and the dads of so many artists working today, including myself.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have some musical notes on the screen now, so I turn to Hayes Greenfield, musician, instrumentalist, jazz saxophone player. There's a saxophone tucked way back there, which we might hear in a little bit. Educator, thinker about art and music, and who happens to have been the saxophone teacher of Roy Lichtenstein for the last few years of his life. So how did that all happen?
First of all, I want to say it's an honor to be here with everybody here. Just incredible. And I met Ellsworth once, and he was just a gem, like Roy, just absolutely wonderful. And my experience with meeting Roy was because I scored a film called Reflections in 1992 for Checkerboard. And the director of it said, "Hey, you want to go meet Roy for lunch? And maybe he'll give you some ideas." And so we went and had lunch at what was that place? Florent. And, we had his table in the back. And had a great time and had we hit it off. And I guess then he saw the score, he saw the film, and he enjoyed the score. And Dorothy and I were at a screen, I think it was here in DC at a screening, or an art show that Roy was showing at, and she was telling me that Roy always wanted to play the saxophone. And I said, well, when I go, and she knew about the type of saxophone. I did not expect her to say a Selmer Mark VI, which is a very coveted horn.
And he had played the clarinet growing up.
Roy had a few clarinet lessons.
Okay, not a lot.
Yeah, but
okay.
growing up.
No,
It was all gone. Okay.
Yeah, but Roy spent a lot of time on 52nd Street. Roy Eldridge, the trumpet player, once passed him a joint that he talked about it, and he didn't know what to do with it. He was 18 and he just passed it on. But
this is why we come here, for these stories. Roy and Roy.
So, and he was a really serious jazz listener, right? I mean, he was really and very serious. And
well, I'll just say for a moment that around this time, I was taking some flute lessons myself, struggling, and Roy could just pick up this flute and hear just a line of music and play it. And I think I talked to you when I decided to buy him a saxophone for his birthday.
Right.
I wanted advice from you. And didn't I hire you for 6 months of lessons?
Well, you said get him a saxophone, and then you can give him lessons. I said okay, and I was at my repair guy, and I said, and he said, oh, I got this great new 6, and then so we hooked that up, and we got it for Roy, and then I started giving him lessons, and he was really, really amazingly into it and very curious. And then, he dropped off and he went away for a while, or you guys went to Florida or something.
Maybe.
And then he came back and he called me up to practice and have a lesson. And we hung out, and he started to play. And he said that he'd been practicing. And he played a note, and I just said, hold on, Roy. I said, stop, Roy. And I said, you haven't been doing any of the stuff that you asked me to do, that I asked you to do, in terms of, it's like you asked me to teach you. As a teacher, when you're teaching somebody, you have a relationship with them, right? And there's a responsibility. And it was really important to me to be able to be the best teacher I could be. So I said to Roy, if you don't practice, you want to learn the saxophone, because everybody was talking about Larry Rivers was a saxophone player, and Roy really wanted to jam with Larry, and I said, if you really want,
He didn't just want to jam with him, though.
No, well, that was a little later. He wanted to there was like a cutting session, because I knew Larry a little bit, and had known him as a horn player first. So he wasn't very good, but that's whatever.
Off the record.
Off the record. So Roy looked at me, and he realized that he really wanted to study with me. And at that point, he became a grasshopper. And it blew my mind, because here is this guy who's got pieces in museums all over the world renowned, and was so humble and he wanted to learn the saxophone so seriously that he started practicing an hour every day. And he really, I would bring him he would come over to my house. We'd have a lesson sometimes on Washington Street, and then others at my house. And I have a drum set and piano, and I'd be playing, and he'd say, what's that? What's that? What'd you do there? And then I had a drum set, and, we would start playing. And, I was like, pretending I was Elvin Jones and really crashing, like beating the drums. And Roy is like playing and just really having an amazing moment, where he's like just free. And at one point I looked up and he was beet red, and I thought, oh my God, this guy could like have a stroke or a heart attack in my house. I gotta just come way down. Anyway, so, and then what was so beautiful about the progression of Roy is that as he got better, I started to, I ran a music program, an after-school program at the door, which the Meyerhoffs, Bob Meyerhoff, helped create a music studio for us, for the musicians, after Roy had died. And he would love to play because nobody knew who he was. And he loved his anonymity. He was just such a sweet, loving man. And there was an 18-year-old alto player, and they would be like off in the corner talking alto, about the notes and the different stuff. It was just great. He taught a girl how to sing the blues. And then when he got to a certain level, he started to. I would invite him. I did a couple of gigs at a place called actually I did several gigs at the Internet Cafe, and Roy came and I had a duo with his bass player, Dean Johnson, and Roy came and sat in a couple of times, and it was beautiful because you don't really grow with the musical language. You can practice till forever and ever, but you're really on a gig. That's where you really develop.
So I want to ask you something that I know the answer to, but Hayes is married to an art historian. He hangs out with art historians, and he has an art historical thought
Yes.
about Roy and late Roy's work and the connection maybe to playing music.
So this is what I think, and it's they've done a lot of MRIs on musicians and everybody, right? But the part of there's more surface area in your brain that lights up when you're improvising to music, and music's abstract, and it kind of like bypasses the frontal lobe, which is our governor, which is what we use to process words and language and think before we speak and blah blah blah. And I think as Roy really, first of all, and what I mentioned in the beginning about him being so like a grasshopper, I think it was so new and fresh for him, like he was a child again, with sound, and just loved the sound of the saxophone and loved practicing it, just enjoyed it. That the abstraction of the sound made it possible as he became a more educated musician or gained more facility, because he was practicing it very seriously, that he was able to, I think it opened up some areas in his creative thought process. And we would go around the studio. Every time I was there, we'd walk around the room before we had a lesson, and he would talk about what he was working on. And at one point I remember, and I can't remember if this was 96, the beginning of late 95, 96, he came to the plate and he looked at me and he said, "Man, I am finally free of the black lines." It was like he was liberated, and I'll never forget it. And if you go on the Lichtenstein Foundation website, and I urge everybody to do it because it's really amazing, and you look at the image duplicator, because it does it by time, right, by date or by year. In 94, it starts. There's a piece that he begins to play with the black lines. You'll see it in a chair, and he's changed the colors. And then in actually that's in 94, and then it Bust. I think it's nude with Bust. There's something in the back, and then it starts to really open up. 94, 95, 96 in the house, which was really amazing, because the house, every time you walk by it, it breathes. I mean, the thing that always knocked me out about the house is that
If it's installed properly, it looks as if it's rotating when you walk around it, because it looks as if it's convex, but it's really concave. Right? Or do I mix them up?
It's really concave.
It's
yeah.
concave.
It looks like
Right,
it's
and
convex.
it's built in reverse perspective, and sometimes called the Chinese dragon illusion. So when you walk by it, the part that should get smaller gets bigger, and vice versa, and it's sort of a really almost sickening in an interesting way experience at its best. Yeah, but maybe I didn't choose the right word.
No, but I want
The Bridget Riley. The Bridget Riley you
op
have.
art, absolutely.
with-
Yeah,
Can
right.
do that
Yeah,
a little bit.
indeed. But I mean,
But if you look at 97,
yeah, I'm the art historian here. But go ahead. Go ahead.
But when you look at the end of 96 and 97, it explodes. He's so beyond the black lines, and even like the Chinese landscapes, which are just so zen-like and gentle, but he's so free.
Can I add that there's a certain type of improvisation that comes into Roy's work to the later work. There's a lot. He's playing with the structure of different kinds of filters or screens in the prints and in the paintings, the ways in which he's engaging color in the brushstrokes, variations of like mutable, malleable color with the flat red, yellow, blue structure, the ways in which he's pushing space. It's like variety and variation become a full ingredient, and that goes hand in hand with the notion of improvisation, because you're dealing with space that you might not know what the conclusion is going to be, but you're allowing the potential of space to build into something very new for yourself. And that play is the thing that artists who are engaged with music and in drawing and design can, like, you can see like all that comes together, whether it's dance, you know,
Right.
whether it's music, whether it's painting or sculpture, whatever. It's the ways in which pattern creates this and structure creates this syncopation within the structure or the making of the work is like music, and using the potential of improvisation, it can become even something that's like, wow.
I'm very excited. I want to get in here because, you know, this business about the black line is very reminiscent of Mondrian, who, once he started listening to boogie woogie music in New York in the 40s, his black lines became these, they exploded into these tiled, colored lines. Or, I mean, if you think about other artists as well, I mean, maybe late work, I don't know. Dorothy, do you have a thought?
Well, I think you could say when Roy got rid of the black lines, the paintings definitely became more lyrical and musical, in a sense, of a flow. I liked what Odile said about that improvisation.
Ellsworth hated jazz. just kidding. What he did listen to is opera, mostly. He was very much into classical music, and he would put music on occasionally when he painted, but rarely.
Right. Well, Roy liked Bach, and Charlie Parker. He cut his eye teeth on Charlie Parker.
Did he like Ornette Coleman?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he did. I mean, he was young. He was probably too young to get into any of the clubs, but he had a very brave friend who, you know, convinced him that they'd get in to these clubs, and they did, you know, when he was not, I guess you had to be only 18 to drink in those days.
Yeah. Well, Birdland, you go to Birdland, and they had a I forget what they call it. It's like in the back for kids who were anybody under 18 who couldn't drink. Bleachers. That's what they call it, the bleacher section.
Yeah. So Ellsworth, getting back to Ellsworth,
I saw Josephine Baker in Paris.
That counts. That counts. Definitely counts.
Oh, yes, that counts for a lot.
Wow.
There we go.
Mm-hmm. In the
Whole chapter.
in the 1920s.
I think Roy was always a little envious of the fact that Ellsworth got to live in Paris, which had been something Roy really wanted to do. That was the idea at the end of World War II, even though lots of European artists were coming to New York. There was still this idea that Paris was a center of an art world. In the 40s, I think that was still the case.
Yeah, no, a lot of Ellsworth's teachers at the Boston Museum School were German and from Europe, so he really, in fact, Beckman came to the museum school when he was there, and was basically all the male students were very excited that Beckman was coming, and all he did was crit the female students.
An old story. But I want to think about Ellsworth and music a little bit, because it seems to me a lot of his work was improvisation and intuition. Certainly, this is not someone who's measuring and doing math. And I was lucky to see him install a work, I think, at the Byler and the work was coming down, and he was telling the crane to move over a little bit this way or a little bit that way, or cut down that tree, please, and it was amazing because, there's a lot of people are, on the clock here. And I know this is true of other installations where it was a matter of being in the moment for him, which I think.
Well, there's an interesting story that I have told quite a bit during this Centennial, which is Ellsworth was showing a spectrum with Sidney Janis, and Albers happened to be in the gallery at the same time. And Albers came down and was in the lobby, I guess, of the building that the gallery was in. And Ellsworth went up to him and said, nice to see you. And Albers said, what color theory did you use? And Ellsworth said, I didn't use a color theory. I didn't use one. And Albers said, it looks it. But Ellsworth he felt as though some of the earlier abstract artists needed some kind of they needed formulas. They couldn't just go out there and just improvise abstraction. And Ellsworth was caught sort of in between those people in the 30s, like Van Tongelu and a number, and even Mondrian to a certain extent. And then also the minimalists on the other side, which were all educated in universities and could talk about art and talk about abstraction in a highly intellectual way. And Ellsworth said, I use my eyes. If you turn off your mind and look only with your eyes, everything becomes abstract. And I think that's a nice sentiment.
Well, I'd add to that. That's something Ellsworth did with postcards and lots of things. I mean, it's as if he was looking at the world around him and turning it into one of his paintings.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
But there's also this. I feel like I wanted to ask you, Jack, about the curves in a lot of the later work and the relationship to the flowers and the contour nature.
Well, I think Ellsworth did curves in a number of different ways. Hand-drawn curves, which are not radiuses, but most of his life. I would say that's the same thing as the black line with Roy to a certain extent. That all of a sudden they weren't radiuses of circles. Ellsworth said, I think he did a painting that's been destroyed that had circles in it. And he said circles are too complete form. The form is too complete. And I think towards the end of his life, he started doing irregular curves.
I did not know that. I've been telling people that the great story that he would use an incredibly long string in order to, inscribe a segment of a circle
It's interesting what happened with Ellsworth's work itself, that it was the stretchers had to be made. So he worked more like an architect, if you will, because he had to have the stretchers made before he could stretch them and paint them. So there was a certain kind of conceptualization and how these basically canvases would go together. But I also think people don't realize before the computer that Ellsworth actually hand drew all of the curves and sent them down to be fabricated in New York City with a stretcher maker. Yeah.
So basically what I'm getting from this is that he's really an intuitive artist.
Totally intuitive. And he works backward and forward. Like he said he didn't really want to let anybody see his sketchbooks because he said there are still things in the sketchbooks that I'm working on from the 50s and from earlier times. Ellsworth would, I don't know if it was with Roy and Dorothy, but there's a story where he's walking down the street and he sees a piece of paper that's folded. And he walks by it and he said, "Oh, excuse me, I forgot something back at the restaurant." And you go on. And he went back and picked it up and put it in his pocket to use later.
Well, I think Roy got his idea of a Greek temple from the cardboard cups in the coffee shop with the
Right.
Temple of Apollo.
Those curves, why I brought that up particularly was just to say that there's something so embodying about that line and the irregularity that you speak to, the ways in which that gets, like we talk about the intuition and not knowing the way the curve will reach from one point to the end point, but that it exists as a movement. In that way, his work amazingly comes back to the body or referring to the body. But what I find ultimately always so fascinating about the work is that it, even if we have color and we have a shape, we have a shaped canvas, when you look at it, you escape yourself. You escape the understanding of your physicality and even the understanding of the physicality of that object in front of you, and you go off in your mind. And that way you perceive space in your mind. Like Roy's work, the way you perceive your space, your mind can become multiple things.
Can I just say something about this one image here, which that white shape is called bridge, arch, and reflection. And it's not the space underneath a chair. It is actually more abstract than that, because it is the space underneath an arch and then the reflection of that space. So it's actually two things that even don't exist.
Double negative,
Yes.
almost.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And it's great to have these images just scrolling along here of the artists at work. I think it supports everything that we're saying. And Dorothy.
No, I was going to ask Jack, was Ellsworth very regular in his working habits?
I think he was and he wasn't. I think he was really involved when he had a show. So there would be a lapse of 6 months or a year where he'd be so concentrated on what he wanted to do and to read what was being written and to, he was a control freak. And so, no, he as you said, he would. I was just out at the Pulitzer Foundation, and when they had a large-scale maquette that they were doing, and they put it up, and Ellsworth said, "Move it over 1 inch." And he said, it's over 18 feet or 20 feet high. And so if you take 1 inch and multiply it by that many times, it really does affect the vision of what you're looking at. And he was very precise about things. He knew he could tell scale, with little pieces of paper. He could see whether it would be, he could blow it up or not. And I think he did the same with color. I think what people don't, he's considered a great colorist, but I think what people don't understand is the black and white works are much, much more difficult, but that's where he starts, with the black and white, with shadow, a thing and its shadow. The black and white works are great, though, so look into them, you guys.
So we could go on and on.
We could. Here, wait. Let me read something out of...
Your notes.
You want to read? Is there anything we haven't said, especially Dorothy and Jack, about these guys?
I would just say Roy was very regular in his working habits. He was usually down in the studio by 10 because people came to work. And he would work and break for lunch, and usually either take everyone to lunch or take some people to lunch, and then go back and work again all afternoon, usually till 6. He loved, actually, finally, having a studio where he did not have to leave the house to get into the studio. So, he could get up at any time and, watch paint dry or put another coat on.
Did he work on the weekends?
I worked on weekends because I think it's
When
it's
you don't
what he
have
loved to
employees
do.
on when you don't have people there.
And especially nice when you don't have anyone working.
One thing I wanted to know is did he let either of you into this studio? I'm sure he did in each case, but at what point were you advisors, aesthetic, springboards? How did that?
Let me just.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great question, but let me
Okay.
just let. I think I just had there are two little stories. One is Ellsworth bought Roy and Dorothy's apartment on 79th Street, and we slept on their Formica bed in the bedroom for the first 5 years. So there's some kind of relationship here that
It came with the apartment.
it came with the apartment. And the other thing is that
I'm glad you got that one in there. That's a good one.
well,
Yeah.
on art historical fact. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing is, we went out together. I don't know if you remember this, but we went out on a MGM flight, and Ellsworth and Roy were playing chess, and the light was coming in, and it looked like an Ingmar Bergman film. It was pretty amazing. It was we had some. I mean, we've spent a lot of time together when Roy was alive, and
Yes.
less so now, which I regret. But
I can't leave my house. Except for today.
Well, before we, go ahead.
I do just want to say, when Jim and I invited artists out to do prints, they sent them first class air tickets. And at that time, artists never really traveled first class. It seemed like a really amazing thing. And they always put us up at the Chateau Marmont.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I think, was you. I mean, when we went out on that MGM, it was like a special flight that was set up like a gambling.
no, it
Casino.
was for Hollywood. They did have a Las Vegas.
Yeah. So wasn't Faye Dunaway?
Yeah, I helped her with her bags.
That's what I'm saying. That Jack was always the one who went over and approached Faye Dunaway or Renee Fleming or.
She's here.
She's here, I think.
That's my story tonight. Don't.
Okay, I'll stop right there.
Okay. Well, we have a little treat, a little musical treat, because that's what a saxophonist should do. So, Hayes, you want to tell us what you're going to do, or you just want to do it? He's just going to do it.
This was Roy's favorite tune.
It was one he could play.
Well, there was actually a piece that a conceptual piece for him that we did called Dots and Lines. Should I see if anybody wants to do that? So I got a question for you all.
Can you hear? Can you hear, Hayes? Take a microphone if you're going to really conduct this exercise.
So I have a question. You don't have to do this, but would you like to play a piece that Roy did based on his artwork? And you guys can help us do this? Okay. Okay. It's called, you all said yes, correct? Okay, so now you're committed. No matter how silly and foolish you might think this is. Okay?
We'll do it too.
Okay, so this is a piece called, it's very simple, it's a piece called Dots and Lines. When I put my finger up in the air and go like that, that's a dot. So can you give me what you feel the sound of a dot sounds like? Wait until I do it. You guys are very polite. That's Right? Here we go. Thank you. So now for Roy's favorite tune. So we all know that tune, right? Body and Soul. And you know, I'm sure that Roy heard this because he loved Coleman Hawkins too. And you know, Coleman Hawkins did this in I think out of 39, 37. He recorded Body and Soul and he didn't even play the melody. All he did was improvise on it.
Thank you, Hayes Greenfield. And O'Dealy Donald Odita. And Jack Shear. Dorothy Lichtenstein. This was just such a rare experience for me to sit and talk with people who are the inside of art, and with all of you, FAPE and non-FAPE people there. Thank you very, very much, everybody.